Morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Celtic Way morning briefing, streaming live from X, Facebook, and of course YouTube. My name is Ryan McGinley. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Tony Haggerty. Tony, it's the second day in a row we've both been doing this. Are you getting used to it?
Yes, indeed, long time no speak. Yeah, it's good to be talking about all things Celtic.
Yeah, people maybe don't realise that we talk to each other a lot throughout the day. Despite being in different places, we both talk a lot about Celtic, and we all want the same thing for Celtic, which is, I guess, some transfer dealings at this time of year ahead of the start of the league season. Tony, before we get started into the topics, I just want to come to you. How are you feeling at this point of the season? Sunday's coming up, the game against St Mirren, first game of the season, Flag Day. How are you feeling in general about the upcoming season?
I still think we need players in, Ryan. At least three, to my reckoning. I think we've got enough in the armoury to beat St Mirren on Sunday when you unfurl the flag. But St Mirren are a team that have caused us problems, and they'll be very resolute under Stephen Robinson, and they'll do the same when they come to Celtic Park. So anybody amongst the supporters who think this is what's known in Glasgow parlance as a gimme, it's certainly not. Celtic are going to have to work hard to win on Sunday. And in an ideal world, I think we spoke about this yesterday, Celtic would have had players in and settled and ready to hit the ground running. I think whilst I'm not saying there's widespread panic amongst the Celtic supporters, because there's still a lot of time in the window left yet to do some deals, I think there's major concern, Ryan. I don't think you can run away from that.
Definite frustrations I think I've seen on social media over the past few weeks, and the frustrations are getting a wee bit louder. And I think that's understandable because there's a Champions League qualifier just on the horizon. You can basically see it coming. You see the way that those uh, those qualifying ties are going. We'll be keeping an eye out to see what teams go through, because that will directly impact who Celtic play in the playoff round. But the fact that these teams are already playing each other means that is getting closer and closer to transpiring for Celtic. And the later they leave it for players, the less time that these players have got to acclimatise. I just want to start off the show by talking about Jahmai Simpson-Pusey, who is a Manchester City defender. We spoke about him yesterday at length, Tony, but yesterday there was reports that suggested that Celtic had made an offer, a loan offer, to sign the player from Manchester City. He's been linked with a move to Scotland, but he's also been linked with English Championship sides who have registered an interest in the Premier League 2 Player of the Year. He is very highly rated in Manchester City's academy system. Pep Guardiola rates him very, very highly, really positive comments about him, especially last season when he came in for a couple of games. He's been a youth player at Manchester City since 2013. He got his first taste of senior football last season. He appeared 6 times in all competitions for the first team, including, I think it was twice in the Champions League. So it seems as if this transfer story, Tony, has got legs. And despite his age being 19, I guess if you're good enough, you're old enough.
Yeah, that's the adage, isn't it? And I think Celtic seemingly want to follow through in this and see what the players' thoughts are. His thoughts are that he wants to get regular first team football, Ryan. And I think if he signed for Celtic, I think Manchester City would certainly want a guarantee that he would play regular first team football. And I know no players can give sort of those kind of guarantees, but I think if a player like Simpson-Pusey was to come, then I think Celtic would make sure that he played an ample amount of games in order to satisfy Manchester City. And he also want to canvass his thoughts. His thoughts are that he does want to go out and play. I always say that Celtic are a fantastic club for that. But my only caveat, and we spoke about this yesterday, I would want a loan with an option to buy, Ryan. I really do. I'm not in favour of developing other teams' players. Not when we can maybe develop our own players. Then in that sense, I get that he's got a slight pedigree. He's the EPL2 Player of the Year. He's played in the Champions League, so he ticks a few, and he's had a couple of Premier League games as well. So he ticks a couple of boxes in that sense. But would that be to the detriment of somebody like Dane Murray, who the manager really likes and has been talking up? And so I asked myself, what's the difference there if you're going to take this guy on loan for a year would you not be better than trying to develop Dane Murray if that's the case? And you want to give, a young player regular football. It's just it's just a question that's been, turning and tossing in my mind.
I guess the follow up question to that would be, well, is Simpson-Pusey a better player than Dane Murray at his age? It does give me similar sort of vibes to when Celtic brought in Jason Denayer 10, 11 years ago from Manchester City, and from where Celtic where Celtic were with their centre backs then, the improvements that Jason Denayer made to that centre back lineup alongside Virgil van Dijk, because the two of them were a tremendous partnership for that season that they played together. Actually, some people said that Denayer was better than Van Dijk at that point. I thought they were just as good as each other, and they both helped each other in that season. I guess that's the argument. Is Simpson-Pusey better than what Celtic have got in reserve? I know there'll be that argument that you should develop your own players in Dane Murray, but could sentimentality come into it, and Celtic just stay with the players and just go with the players that they've got rather than maybe potentially bringing in an upgrade, even if it is on loan?
Yeah, that is the $64,000 question, isn't it? And you have to see if Brendan Rodgers thinks that Pusey is better than Dane Murray and Trusty or Scales. And yeah, we have had success with Denayer, but Denayer only played for a season, didn't he? And then he left for Besiktas, didn't he? Was it Besiktas he left for?
He moved to a number of clubs. I know that he went to Sunderland not long after he left Celtic, maybe a couple of years after, but I think he went back out on loan. I think it was actually Galatasaray. I believe I'll double check that when you're next speaking. But he definitely did make a move to Turkey at some point in his career.
Yeah, like go to a Turkish career, and there was talk of Celtic trying to sign him on a permanent deal, but that never materialised. Yeah, no. So, and that was all the talk then, that he should have signed him on a loan option to buy. I'm in favour of Simpson-Pusey coming, but only with a loan option to buy, Ryan. Because if that's not the case, I would rather they develop Dane Murray, or because both Dane Murray and Austin Trusty have shown up well in pre-season, and hopefully they can kick on and maybe get that extended run of games and be the partner for Cameron Carter-Vickers that the manager so desperately craves.
Yeah, Strasbourg are also interested in Simpson-Pusey, which is quite an interesting one, because if you know anything about Strasbourg, you know that they're affiliated with Chelsea's group as well, so they get a lot of Chelsea's youngsters, the young players that are coming through. Chelsea's got a massive squad, but they need to send out X amount of players every season in order to balance the books, so it is quite interesting that they're getting linked with a Man City youngster, but that's definitely one to keep an eye out on. In terms of other positions, before I bring in Chris Sutton's own comments on the three positions that need attention, Tony, where are your areas that you think need the most attention in the upcoming month?
Now, having said that, I still think...
Sorry, am I asking you all the big questions this morning, Tony?
You're all right, it's fine. I still think Celtic need a left-sided centre-back. I still want a centre midfielder, an enforcer, someone with a bit of steel, a bit of height, but presence. Need a centre forward, and they need a winger. So that's 4. I did say 3, but in an ideal world, Ryan, I would want 5 players. You know what I mean? We're not going to get 5 players. So, try and go for 4, maybe get 2. I don't know. Just Celtic are notoriously put their fans through the ringer at this time of year, always. And we've spoken about it since the Scottish Cup final. The build-up to the Champions League qualifier started the minute Celtic lost that match, or it should have started. And I think there's a real frustration, which is now starting to worry the Celtic supporters about being equipped for this Champions League qualifier. They've got the August the 14th deadline to register players, haven't they? Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yep, that is right.
And then they'll find out exactly who their opponents are. I think there's real jeopardy here, Ryan, if Celtic don't get the chequebook out in the next couple of weeks. that tie hangs in the balance regardless of who you draw.
Yeah, I think there's jeopardy regardless of who Celtic sign, to be honest, because it's a knockout tie. in the Champions League. It's big for both teams that play in it in that tie, Celtic and their opponents, in terms of their whole season. Because I just think the difference between the Champions League and the Europa League is massive, even just for scheduling. The fact that you're playing on Tuesdays and Wednesdays instead of Thursdays, exclusively on Thursdays. I know sometimes you can play Wednesday games because of fixture issues elsewhere, but it's usually Thursday nights. The same for the Europa Conference League. So I guess that's that selling point, that unique selling point of the Champions League, is that you play on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Of course, the financial aspects are massive as well. It is real night and day between the Champions League and the other two European competitions. So that's got to be the focus. And yes, there's jeopardy in the game, but also I would say there's jeopardy anyway. Chris Sutton, I was lucky enough to speak to Chris Sutton yesterday at Hampden, and we were speaking about a wide range of topics regarding Celtic, all Celtic, of course. He was talking about the transfer window, and he gave some interesting answers in where Celtic need to strengthen, as well as what Brendan Rodgers will be thinking at this moment in time. So at Hampden yesterday, he said there is still time, when we asked if there is if more movement is required to strengthen the playing squad. However, it is fair to say that there is still work to be done. The squad should not be weaker now than it was at the end of last season, but that is the case. Tierney's signing is a huge boost, while Negrin coming in looks neat and tidy, but there are still areas to address. A few days ago, Brendan Rodgers used the word ambition in his press conference. He's very calculated in everything that he says, and that tells you everything. It is okay to get the baseball bat out right now, but there is still time in the window. It is best to judge Celtic at the end of the window and see what happens in the next few weeks. Now, from those comments, Tony, it would seem as if Chris Sutton has a different timeline, or a slightly altered timeline to maybe what the rest think in terms of that Champions League qualifier. He wants to look at the end of the Champions League, at the end of that game, and in the end of the transfer window in August. But for Celtic, they need to get transfer business done earlier, don't they?
Of course, listen, but again, he's making a valid point that you can shout and scream from the rooftops, and they could pull, three rabbits out of the hat very late. Everybody talks about the time between Cameron Carter-Vickers and Jota. They were all done very late in the window. Thank you to Connor Hall for that, for becoming a valued YouTube member. Appreciate that. So again, it is, you can bump your gums, but I just think, the Celtic fans are pretty frustrated right now. I think after last year, they thought, their Champions League exploits, and they were really excited about what could be achieved. And Chris Sutton's right, you can argue that the team's weaker now. And he mentioned a couple of things. Celtic haven't replaced Kuhn yet. They haven't really replaced Kyogo, have they? In any stretch of them.
Remains to be seen with Yamada, to be honest.
Yeah,
I would say I watched this space on Yamada.
Yeah, I think we're all got high hopes for Yamada after glimpsing him what he can do on against Al Ahly in the Como Cup. So yeah, but we haven't gone out and immediately said, right, here's our replacement for these guys that have left. And Chris Sutton was talking about the fact that they've not replaced Kyogo as well. So I just think there is glaring omissions and gaps in the Celtic team right now. We all know what they are. The manager knows what they are. And it's, and if this is the strategy, Ryan, this risky strategy of leaving it till late, then I tell you what, everybody's fingernails are going to be bitten to the quick. But history tells you it's sometimes the way Celtic like to do business. But if you're going to leave it that late, then you're going to end up paying a premium for players, aren't they? Because they know at that point there might be a desperation about Celtic. I felt that when Celtic did what they did in Europe last year, I was really excited to think, right, everything that they do now will be in preparation for this qualifier coming up, and take all the necessary jeopardy out it as much as you can. They've done the exact opposite, Ryan. We like the look at Negrin. We've got him for a decent price. Brilliant. Yamada, we've got high hopes for, and you're just like, what else is there? What else have they done? Not much. And Amura has come in and surprised even the manager. Callum Osmond has not had a look in, apart from, an outing against Cork and an outing against Estrella. So what have Celtic been doing all summer? And I get all that it's difficult to get deals over the line, that kind of stuff. And I guess a lot of Celtic supporters have their eye on what's happening over the city. They're bringing in players right, left, and centre. I don't unduly concern myself about what uh, Celtic's rivals are doing. I concern myself with what Celtic are all about. And the manager the other night mentioned the A word. Excuse me, ambition. I still think he was a wee warning shot over the bow to those upstairs. Ambition. What is your ambition? Shows it. Shows what ambition you have for this club, not just domestically but at European level as well. And at this moment, it's sadly lacking in both fronts, Ryan.
Yeah,
If you've got to be honest.
Tony, do you think that it is difficult for clubs to do business, or do you think it's just difficult for Celtic to do business in the transfer window? Are other teams struggling to get their business done ahead of crucial Champions League games, or is it just Celtic that struggle to adapt maybe with the times and get those players in early? Because you've got to remember, last season, yes, they brought in Arne Engels, they brought in Adam Ida, and they brought in Austin Trusty for large fees. They were all in August. You know, I mean, we're going into the last few days of July into August, and Celtic really haven't spent that much money. You know, they've gained more money than they've spent this summer. You know, 16 and a bit million for Nicholas Kuhn. Some other players have left, whereas, you know, you spent 1.5 million on Yamada, 1.5 million on Benjamin Negrin, which, you know, they look like good signings, but you'd expect a little bit more cash to be spent, especially if you want to ply your trade in the Champions League. So I guess my question to you is it difficult for teams like Celtic, or is it just Celtic that find it difficult to do these business deals?
I think the common denominator here is Celtic, isn't it? Celtic find it difficult to do business deals, and I don't think you cover yourself in any glory when you let it be known that you've bid 1.5, 1.75, 3.5 for Jacob Brown when they want £6.5 million. The Celtic want a premium for their players, and they don't entertain bids that fall below that. Yet Celtic seemingly play this game where they lowball and then go up in even lower increments. If a club wants £6.5 million, Ryan, and you go in with 1.5, your next bid shouldn't be 1.75 million. That's just insulting. And again, it attracts negative publicity to your club. If you want to conduct negotiations, do business deals properly. I'm not saying you're going to pay over the odds for these kind of players, but be realistic, because you want clubs to be realistic when they're coming to try and prize your assets away, and you set a high bar for that because you want to sell them for vast amounts of profit. Selling, clubs selling players to Celtic operate in the same way. They want value for money for their players too. So you have to be realistic, and you have to respect the rules of the game, and offer something that's fair, not insult them with low ball territory stuff, which makes a deal even harder. But again, you have to protect yourself and not get fleeced. And a lot of people think Celtic were fleeced for certain deals last season, ones that you mentioned, like some Adam Ida and Trusty and Engels. But again, that goes down to your business practices, doesn't it? And trying to conclude deals. And other clubs seem to be able to be linked with a player, Ryan, one day and sign them within 48 hours. Celtic's always long, protracted affairs, isn't it? Because they do this, this game where they bid, low ball bid, another low ball bid, and then they start to get kind of realistic. So I don't know why, but the common denominator whenever deals are happening in the transfer window is Celtic. It takes Celtic a long time to conclude any kind of deal, doesn't it?
Yeah, the optics just don't look good when you hear about these negotiations that are ongoing, and then you hear about potential bids going in, and they're not that increased as you would expect them to be if negotiations. I just feel as if, and I agree with the point that you're making about Celtic on the selling side of things are so proactive with their transfer fees. They always get the best amount or near enough the best amount for their players. But on the other side of things, it's as if they don't adapt with the times and they don't use the same strategies that they would use on the selling side because I think the two have got to be balanced equally. Otherwise, it will be lopsided, and Celtic won't bring in the players that are required to replace the players that are leaving the club. Nicholas Coon's a massive loss. Goals and assists aplenty. Jota, who's injured just now, you need to replace his goals and assists. I know Daisen Maeda plays there. He can play up front too. The striking position, still a lot of question marks there. Centre-back position, left-back. There's a lot of question marks, Tony, and it's a massive game coming up in 2-3 weeks. And it's coming quickly, and it'll be here before you know it. I just want to bring up Chris Sutton's comments again. He was talking about qualification in Europe. He says he agrees. He understands the situation that the club are in, though he appreciates how vital Celtic's participation in Europe is for all concerned. He says he agrees with that when asked about the club's registration deadline for the Champions League, which is August the 14th, plays a part in getting players in quickly. It's always a frustration, and it's not easy for Celtic, Rangers or any Scottish club in the market which they have to shop in. We all understand the importance of these Champions League games, first and foremost, for the club to carry on the success they had last season. What you want to do as a club and as a manager is to give yourself the best possible chance of qualifying. These qualifying ties are of great jeopardy, as you said, Tony, and you want to go in as strong as you can. Right at this moment, Celtic could be stronger. He then mentioned a couple of positions, and he mentioned 3 positions in particular that Celtic need to strengthen in ahead of the Champions League qualifiers. He says, I would say that it's a wait-and-see situation when asked if the hierarchy are gambling with the Champions League. Once you get past the deadline and get to the end of the window, then it's fair to judge. You can say one thing or another, and Celtic could go in and bring in 3 world beaters into the club in the next week. Then we would all look pretty stupid. The left-back position is still an issue. The signing of Tierney is really exciting, and they've got Inamura in as well. I still think there's an area of concern because of the loss of Greg Taylor. I think he's a big loss. Nobody plays that inverted role as well as he did. He was so integral in Celtic dominating the middle of the park when he came in inverted. Then you look at the wide areas with losing Kuhn, despite the good money they got from him. If anything were to happen to Daisen Maeda, then they would be bare out wide. James Forrest has been a brilliant player for Celtic, but he is getting on, and Yang Hyun-jun, and is he going to be consistent enough? It's all about that trust element, and then he mentions the striking position as well as you did. I'll never understand why Celtic sold Kyogo. He said, I do not understand why they've not replaced him. He somehow ended up at Birmingham City, and nothing against them, but he was brilliant and decided big games with his cleverness. He was really intelligent. People point out to me that he did not do well at Rennes, but he did pretty well at Celtic. So Chris Sutton's saying the 3 positions are at left back, on the wing, particularly on the right wing, where it's only James Forrest and Yang Hyun-jun at this point, as well as Marco Tilio, he can fill in when required. And up front, where Adam Ida, Shin Yamada, and below them, the likes of Maeda, Callum Osmond as well. Would you agree with those 3 positions that he's pointed out, or would you say that they're well stocked, particularly in the left back area?
I wouldn't say they're particularly well stocked, but I still think they need a left-sided centre-back and an enforcer in midfield, so that'd be 5 then, wouldn't it?
Somebody that could maybe do both, Tony, somebody that could play centre-back and left-back. I know there's been some talk that Tierney could potentially play in that role, but he's only really played there for Scotland under Steve Clarke.
Yeah, possibly somebody that can do both. But see, if you're in the market for a certain type of player, Ryan, and you know their costs, right, or you know how much they will cost because you do your due diligence, then Celtic should be all over certain transfers within their financial parameters. I've said to you before, I'm not advocating that Celtic go out and spend 30 million quid on players, but they've known this Champions League qualifier has been in the fixture list since long and weary, and you want to prepare yourself the best as you can. And we're going into a game against St Mirren on Sunday, and you've told me that Marco Tilio could be in contention to play. You
would expect him to be on the bench at this point in time, Tony, and that's what Celtic are at the moment.
Yeah. So to me, Marco Tilio doesn't really have a future at the club, does he? Let's be honest.
He wasn't good enough last season. That's why he went out on loan. So unless he's suddenly get better during his time out on loan at Melbourne City, then
you're being realistic about it, and you've sold Kuhn for £18.5 million. Goals and assists, Kuhn did certainly in the first half of last season. Everybody was excited. So that tells you that something's not right. And unless they're waiting to August and then they're just going to flick a switch and say, right, bang, 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 that's fine. And see if somebody came out and not so much they would tell you that was going to happen, but see if it did happen, then you'd be like, okay, I see the plan now. I just don't see the forward thinking or the strategy here, Ryan. What they're doing with this team, they might have got lucky with Negrin in terms of the price they paid for him, and he looks like a player, and they've did a bit of due diligence there. That's fine. So where are the others who want to fit into that system? The left back that Chris Sutton's talking about, the striker that Chris Sutton's talking about, the winger that Chris Sutton's talking about. So where is the due diligence on these players being in your price range, affordable, and players that can come in into your team style, fit into that, and excite you as well? And something along the line, there's a circuit not connecting, and there's no joining of the dots at this moment in time. I hesitate to go in too hard because they might have a magnificent August, and come the 14th of August have 3 or 4 players in that squad we think, wow, maybe it was worthwhile hanging off. So I'm with Chris Sutton on that sense, but there's an increasing sense of concern, Ryan, worry. It's not panic just yet, but if you're going to get to the 7th and the 10th of August, that kind of area, and they still haven't brought in players in those positions that Chris mentioned and we've mentioned for a long time, then I think you will start to panic.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything that you've said there. And I think there's experience talking in Chris Sutton's words as well, because this isn't the first time he's seen this happen, both probably as a player and as a pundit. He's been there and witnessed it all happen, both at the club and from afar, watching back in. Do you think that's where a lot of the frustration comes, Tony, because of Celtic being stung before in the past? You only need to mention different teams across Europe that Celtic have faced off against when they were supposedly not prepared, not equipped, not well enough equipped for the Champions League qualifiers. You could mention Maribor, you can mention Cluj, AK Athens, Braga, if you go even further back. Do you think that's where all the frustration comes from? The fact that Celtic have been stung before by this, and they've had that crutch of being able to get into the Champions League automatically, but now the pressure's on to get players in before, that they're potentially taking a risk when that risk doesn't need to be taken.
It's rinse and repeat for the Celtic supporters in the Champions League, and they're just sick of it, Ryan. Always kind of bolting the stable door after they've been parked out of the Champions League. They used to sign players after that eventuality, didn't they? Bring guys in, and you're thinking, well, what's the point? You round off a list of teams there. None of them stellar European opposition. None of them, and Celtic have succumbed to them when, by all intents and purposes, they should have qualified. Ferencváros is one that particularly sticks in the craw, isn't it?
That's another one I didn't even mention. Legia Warsaw, before they get put out for fielding an ineligible player.
A one-off tie at Celtic Park to get into the Champions League. And they came a copper.
Celtic were playing Ryan Christie through the middle at that point, I remember. So, it's all about failing to prepare is preparing to fail, I would suggest.
And Maribor, you go over to Slovenia and you get a 1-each draw, come to Parkhead and you lose 1-0. That kind of stuff, because again, there was that joke, wasn't it? It's the Champions League, near beaten in the centre of defence. It became a long-running standing joke, didn't it? And then you had Ange come in, and Ange had no time to do anything. Dane Murray played against Midtjylland in Denmark. And then when Celtic were inevitably toughed out the tournament, Ange had his tete-a-tete with the BBC, who called it catastrophic. And he was telling them, well, might be this is not the end, it's just the beginning. And he didn't have time to prepare Celtic for the Champions League qualifiers, and he didn't have the personnel. And so history just seems to repeat itself with Celtic and transfers in this competition. I've said before, those upstairs, they don't treat it with the reverence it deserves. There's prestige and honour, and there's massive finances involved when you get to the Champions League phase of this competition. Celtic board are in it for the finances, that's all. But they have the most elite manager that they could get at this minute in time running their club. He's the biggest asset Celtic have got, yet they're not preparing him and treating this competition with the reverence and respect that it deserves. They want the money that comes attached with it, but they don't want to give the man who could provide them with lots more nights like they had last season. They're not arming Brendan Rodgers with the tools, or they haven't armed them with the tools as of yet. I get that the club's run soundly as a business, fantastic. It's one of the most well-run clubs in European football. We get that. But at some point, you have to, put your money where your mouth is. And because you tell us at the AGM they want a world-class football club run in every terms, in terms of the football operations. Well, this is the most important football operation. That's transfers to help the manager turn Celtic into a successful club, both domestically and in Europe when it matters, which is Celtic's new benchmark. And if it's not the benchmark, it blooming well should be. It's Brendan Rodgers' benchmark. And you have an excess and surplus of cash in the bank, which you've told everybody about. So that's fair enough. It's time you turn around and you said, okay, how can we help you get to where we want in terms of, getting access to the lucrative bounty that you get for winning one qualifying tie. And at this moment in time, Celtic are sadly lacking. And it's small wonder the manager's questioning that ambition of those at the top, because it's not his ambition that's in question or in doubt, because you saw what he could do last season, and that was okay, they spent a few quid, but can you imagine what they did if they really backed this manager, Ryan? But we'll never really know, will we? Unless they go into August and they just go hell for leather and bring in, half a dozen players, which I don't think Celtic will ever do.
Yeah, players of real quality as well. I just want to finally touch on one topic before we end off today's show. It's a landmark day in terms of anniversaries, Tony, because I think it was a day that really put the wheels in motion for Celtic's one of Celtic's most successful ventures over the past 20 years. Now, I believe it was 20 years ago today that Shinsuke Nakamura joined Celtic from Regina in Italy. A massive move for a Japanese player, and since then I believe 10 or 11, a further 9 Japanese players have joined the club off the back of that signing. I know you've got a piece coming out later on today about his impact on the Celtic team, but in terms of modern day heroes, he's right up there, isn't he? And he paved the way for Celtic's current Japanese players to thrive at Celtic, really.
He's the original man from Japan, isn't he? Let's be honest. He came in a relative unknown and he left a demigod, didn't he? And he, I don't think anybody can think of Nakamura without having a Nakamura flashback in their head, whether it's a free kick against Manchester United, both of them, one at Old Trafford as well, people tend to forget, which was great. Mm-hmm. As I've said before, to do it once is maybe deemed fortunate, to do it twice is showboating. His free kick against Kilmarnock, his hat-trick at Tannadice, his swerving goal against Rangers where you were convinced that somebody in the stand had a remote control and was directing that football. There are so many wonderful moments. It's true, isn't it? His chip against Dundee United, which won goal of the season. He was just one of the most supremely talented and gifted footballers of our generation, or certainly yours in my generation. Just he always seemed to have time on the ball. You couldn't mark Nakamura because he always just found space. There was a last-minute free kick against St Mirren at Love Street, the old Love Street. Celtic won 1-0. He plonked the ball down, puts it in the corner. Yeah, and everybody, and I think as well that when you think of Nakamura, you smile, don't you? Because you think he played for us. He gave Celtic so many brilliant moments, and blazed a trail for the 9 that have since followed, and given you some wonderful moments too. And the irony is, he was signed by Gordon Strachan. Gordon Strachan saw this player during his downtime when he was taking a sabbatical from management, and he just happened to come across him. And then when he went back into management at Celtic, he was like, I want to sign this guy. It was just like, can we get the deal done? And funnily enough, that 2.5 million, I think, Brian, from Regina
It
in
was
Italy.
definitely on the cheap side. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I think they certainly got the money's worth as well, Tony, with the moments. Just a moments player. A lot of people make the argument that he was potentially the last world-class Celtic player. Because, at that point, with the free kicks that he was scoring in the Champions League, he was doing it on continental level. He's playing for Japan as well. He actually continued playing well into his 40s as well at Yokohama FC. So he was a fit player, and he was more than just free kicks as well. People talk about his free kicks and his goals from distance. He was actually a really good football player as well, and was a key factor in Gordon Strachan's success at the club.
Well, Ryan, he was a nominee for the Ballon d'Or while he was playing for Celtic in what was the SPL. I mean, obviously it was for his exploits in the Champions League that got him the Ballon d'Or nomination, but he was playing for Celtic in the old SPL, which is now the Scottish Premiership, and I think he came 34th in the list for the Ballon d'Or, which is not bad considering you're playing in Scotland and you're up against the big 5 leagues. So, and he's the last player to make a Ballon d'Or list playing in Scotland. So I think that tells you something about his ability and technique and the player that Celtic had at their disposal. And just wonderful. And not to spoil it, but I interviewed one of his former teammates. It's going on a website around about lunchtime, I think. And he also said, he let me into this, he kept saying, he spoke English, he just didn't let on. Or he spoke more English than he did let on. And
Much like he kept the defences guessing, he kept his own teammates guessing as well. Those players are the difference, aren't they, Tony, in the Champions League, the likes of Nakamura. I'd actually put Boric into that as well in his prime at Celtic. Game winners for Celtic and players that could really bring it out in those top moments. But what a player and what a spell he had at Celtic. Shinsuke Nakamura, 20 years today he signed for Celtic, and look at what he's paved for the current crop of Japanese players. Hopefully the likes of Shin Yamada and Hayato Inamura can continue on that upward trajectory alongside Daisen Maeda and Ryo Hatate this season. Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about Celtic this morning. I know we've been talking a lot about the lack of transfers, but it's been good to speak to you once again. I think it's been a pretty good discussion as well. Thank you to each and every one of the commenters this morning. Sorry if we didn't bring up your comments. It's been a really busy morning. Plenty of people want to get involved in the conversation. If you like what we do, please hit that subscribe button. It is completely free to do, and you'll be notified when we go live, both with pre and post match videos, morning briefings, as well as pre-recorded videos too. Plenty more of them to come this season. Also, if you like what we do, please go to www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. £1 for 6 months of access. You'll get interviews, news, analysis pieces as well. Anything that you're looking for regarding Celtic, it's likely to be on the Celtic Way. So get involved with that. Just go to the subscribe section of our website. Tony, thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleasure as always, enjoyed that.
Yep, and we will see you all tomorrow on the morning briefing at 10 o'clock. Have a very good day, guys, and enjoy your day. Cheers.